It's no secret, games are becoming longer and longer. Longer to develop, longer to sit down and play through. What used to be a focused linear experience with high levels of replayability that kept us returning for years has become these massive time commitments that some of us end up regretting because we became busy, we're too bored to finish it, or the next big AAA game came along and stole our attention. So there it sits, collecting dust in our backlogs. These aren't just chill with something playing in the background kind of games either. These are critically acclaimed masterpieces. Tears of the Kingdom is one of these so-called masterpieces. But at what point does the term masterpiece stop being something only reserved for games that push the industry forward to simply pandering to a certain demographic without even understanding the people they're supposedly representing? This term has gotten so out of hand that, no kidding, I've heard channels use disappointing masterpiece to describe this game. What the hell even is a disappointing or flawed masterpiece? Is this implying that there's a such thing as a perfect masterpiece? Isn't a disappointing masterpiece just the same as calling something an amazing game? My point is that after the hype died down with the sequel to Breath of the Wild, there was a lot of confusion around this. Wasn't this game just given a 10 out of 10? Didn't it improve on everything Breath of the Wild set the groundwork for? Journalists just called Breath of the Wild a mere tech demo in comparison, and I could have swore that this was every Nintendo fan's game of the year, so why now? Well, to simply put it, don't take it personal, kid. This is just business. I'm going to try and put my perspective around this topic, and by that I mean not limiting my opinions to the inside of this echo chamber that has become gaming journalism. The truth is, I think that both Breath of the Wild and its sequel are games of exceptional quality, but masterpieces? I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get sick of this word. In this video, I want to talk about my experience with the Zelda franchise, where I feel like it's going, and what I think its flaws are in its game design, and how it can be improved moving forward without risking losing the soul of this legendary Nintendo property. Let me start by saying this: I love The Legend of Zelda. Whether it's top-down Zelda, 3D Zelda, or what Nintendo likes to call open-air Zelda. I've enjoyed this series for 25 plus years. I definitely have my favorites, as well as some that I don't like to revisit as often, but one thing that no Zelda game has ever under-delivered on is its outstanding sense of adventure. Really, I've never experienced any other game that even comes remotely close to rivaling the sense of adventure I get from playing a Zelda game. Sure, games like Elder Scrolls have an outstanding sense of organic exploration, and I can't deny the feeling I get when I pilot the airship for the first time in a Final Fantasy game, but The Legend of Zelda just hits different. I have this kind of almost visceral, emotional reaction to the adventure in a Zelda game. And admittedly, I've come close to feeling that in other games, but never as strongly as in Zelda. For example, listening to Faraway Times at the end of Chrono Trigger, or Gwen's The Lord of Cinders theme in Dark Souls, and City of Tears in Hollow Knight. These are all games that come to mind when I think of when gameplay, themes, and music all come together at once to make me forget that I'm even playing a game. I even got that with Breath of the Wild for the first time riding on horseback at night, listening to the jumbled piano keys, and all of a sudden that iconic main theme starts playing. It's like less than 20 seconds, and I'm not gonna lie, my eyes got a little watery. To say that the opening hours of this game were magical would be a huge understatement. I wish I could erase my memory and experience walking out of that cave onto the Great Plateau and watching the camera pan out as that music plays for the first time. I swear, I said to myself, there's no way that this is possible. Can I really go all the way to those mountains off in the distance? Is it possible to fit an entire Zelda game on this map without it feeling like the yearly Ubisoft game that I've been so burnt out with for years at this point? Everything in the environment felt so reactive. The act of traversal itself was so satisfying. Sometimes there didn't even have to be some type of treasure on the top of some mountain because my reward for getting up there was gliding down the other side. Wandering around Hyrule Field felt just as big as it did when I was 8 years old playing Ocarina of Time. Hell, my first entire playthrough was spent with the HUD turned off, just being fully immersed in this world. The thing is, though, this is one of those Zelda games that I mentioned happens to be one of my least favorite ones to revisit. Because every time I try to make it past the Great Plateau, I'm just reminded that every single chest has the exact same item in it. Every shrine has the exact same reward, and pretty much everything in this game becomes dull if you've already experienced it. The weapon durability system that the devs put in place to get us to test out a variety of different weapons doesn't really matter because all of the high-level stuff I just mount on the wall at Link's house until I'm ready to fight Ganon or some boss. Yeah, every shrine has at least one chest, but 9 times out of 10, it's just some weapon I don't need or some rupees. Rarely is it ever a unique piece of gear like the climbing set. The entire economy in this game can be broken with a sledgehammer and a little bit of ore, and the crafting system just feels like it was lazily tacked on. Even the most intense combat becomes trivial when I can just open my inventory and give myself infinite health, which is funny because this was never a problem in earlier titles. Just give us limited bottles that we can use during battle and it fixes most of the balancing issues. That's why I was so excited when we finally got to see that a sequel was in the works. I thought finally, here's the chance for the developers to listen to fan feedback and flesh out some of the more undesirable gameplay mechanics from Breath of the Wild. I wasn't part of the camp of people who were disappointed to hear that this game would take place in the same overworld map, seeing it as some type of glorified DLC. I honestly wouldn't be disappointed if this Hyrule became a trilogy. I still think that there's a lot you can do here. That's why when they hit us with the big trailer, you know, the one that had us jumping out of our seats, yeah, I was pretty excited. Seeing what looked like a dungeon rising from the sand in the Gerudo Desert, that giant underground section with all the mine tracks, and that airship that looked like it was commissioned by Bowser? Could it be that they were listening to fans' biggest gripe about Breath of the Wild and they gave us actual dungeons instead of divine beasts that were little more than a few shrines duct taped together? This might actually be worth the title of masterpiece. I'm not gonna lie, they sold me on this one. Before anybody questions me on my Zelda fanboyism, I went ahead and copped me that limited edition Tears of the Kingdom OLED along with a copy of the game on day one. I can't even describe the feeling I got when I skydived down to the Sky Islands and seeing that title card while free falling. They somehow managed to make a better walkout moment than Breath of the Wild. I spent like 4 or 5 hours just immersing myself in this cloudy kingdom before making my way down to familiar territory. And look, I can see why people seem to hate on this game, calling it a bad Zelda game or the laughably disappointing masterpiece, because instead of giving us something new, They kind of just gave us more Breath of the Wild. If you didn't like the shrines in the last game, well, too bad, because this time there's more of them. I don't even think shrines are inherently bad either. The shrines in Breath of the Wild are actually pretty genius for a handheld game because they were designed to be beaten in short bursts. It's just the way that they were implemented was so boring and by the numbers. I think that what they could have done was attached a randomizer to these shrines. That way on repeat playthroughs, you never know what puzzle it's going to be next. That puzzle would permanently tie itself to your save file, so if you didn't finish the shrine and came back to it, it would be that same puzzle in that same shrine. Also, too, the treasure chests that you find in these dungeons could be randomly level scaled as well. For example, in Skyrim, if you're level 5 and you open a chest, it could be an average hunting bow. But if you're level 65, that same chest could contain a piece of ebony armor. Doing little things like this can extremely lengthen a game's longevity. They also decided to give us more enemy types, which was sorely lacking in Breath of the Wild. While yes, this does greatly increase the variety of combat scenarios, it still doesn't matter when I can essentially give myself infinite health and cheese my way through any fight by eating 5 full course meals every time I get hit. Like I said before, they could have given us limited bottles or something similar to like in earlier titles, or they could have done something like deny us access to our inventory until we're no longer in combat. Something like this I feel like could have been easily implemented. That way when you buff yourself for battle, it's like you're preparing yourself for the fight ahead of time. Also, I had another idea that could have spiced up combat. It could have been a meter that fills up, right? And during combat, once it reaches max, it would allow you to summon your sage to do a one-time powerful attack. Like, think of Tulin dropping in and doing a bullet hell attack of arrows instead of those boring, basically useless phantoms. I feel like as far as dungeons go, this is kind of the big one. I'm not gonna lie, they kind of just met us halfway. I'll be fair and say they're better than the Divine Beasts. At least this time around, they have actual themes to the dungeons with unique boss fights, but they still end up not feeling like traditional Zelda dungeons. And I think this is and has always been the biggest gripe from Zelda fans. When you take away how dungeons work in a Zelda game, it's like you're taking away its core identity. But Devin, you say, in order for them to make traditional dungeons like in the past games, they'd have to take away our player freedom. There's no way you'd be able to implement the tool system from those games without requiring a tedious amount of backtracking all the time. Plus, if you did that, then every single dungeon would have to be completed in a set order, further taking away the freedom these games were designed for. Well, what if I told you that you could have dungeons in an open world setting while still retaining Zelda's tried and true formula, complete with hook shots, keys, compasses, maps, and all those wonderful tools that you've come to love. In The Legend of Zelda: Link Between Worlds, there was already proof of concept this could work in an open world format because of its item rental system, allowing you to rent certain tools that you would need for completing a dungeon. That way you could cut out all that tedious backtracking you'd have to do in a giant open world when dungeons require multiple items at once. You could even go a step further and still make the dungeons completable without them, but just make it extra challenging. If you don't believe me, play through Link Between Worlds and tell me you don't have the same revelation as me that this would work perfectly in an open world Zelda game. We've seen what happens to beloved franchises when they lose their identities. Now, I don't think that Nintendo is ever going to be as bad as Ubisoft, but I can definitely see Zelda becoming a shadow of its former self if Nintendo adopts the "this is safe, this is what sells" mentality. I don't want this to happen, Nobody wants this to happen. I've already said before how I've watched Assassin's Creed go from these flawed but human protagonists who were so relatable to these characters who sound like they were written by alien lizard people wearing human skin, or the old man meme, "How do you do, fellow children?" Hell, if it means we need to reboot Zelda and go back to linear for a while, then I'm down for it. I'd rather go back to that than see it become unrecognizable. But what do you think? Do you agree with my opinions? Do you think Zelda is starting to lose a bit of its identity, or do you think that this is the natural evolution for this franchise? I'd like to know what your perfect Zelda game would include down in the comments. I personally would like to see an open-air Zelda game, except this time we're going back to the sea like in the Wind Waker. I think it'd be so awesome sailing around in a ship again in a Zelda game. Well, anyways, thank you for staying with me this far into the video and listening to me rant. I do have another video on Nintendo, my thoughts about the Switch successor if you're interested. Just know it has been triggering people as of late, so there's a warning. Anyways, thank you again and bye.